think the most important thing for every one of us is to find that unity with ourselves, with our true selves, that is in there to be discovered. And only when we do that can we then create relationships with others. And really the key to that is simply to follow the truth. I mean, in our societies now, in our cultures now, concepts like truth, justice, beauty are no longer regarded as real, as absolutes, and that's extraordinarily difficult for people because particularly young people who have no experience, and they're taught that really there is no truth, there is no justice, there is no beauty, even that it's an illusion. And this is extraordinarily damaging for people because they don't really have the way in then to that harmony, because they can't any longer trust what they feel and what they intuit from relationships with other people. So I think that in today's discussion with Roscommon from Barcelona, we saw this really played out in his life, that through encountering Gaudi, in his work he saw a unity which moved him and which really made him draw his attention to himself. And in order to find himself, he had to explore Gaudi's legacy, the inheritance that we have from Gaudi, and that out of that then he created a certainty which has persisted now for 40 years. So I think this is very difficult for young people to find now, but it's there in that kind of example. And as he said, you know, art, whether we call it art or not, this is the only art there is, you know, to actually find that beauty, to create external representations of that beauty we intuit from within, that you know, allows us to recognize that which we desire ultimately, that which defines us, that which, you know, so there is a circuitry. In other words, we are not simply organisms which are kind of crawling around the face of the earth. We're beings on a journey, seeking something that is already programmed, as it were, within us. And that's the journey that we're on as human beings. So I think that we need to understand these elements of ourselves if we're to even know that there's a journey to be undertaken. And trusting that sense of resonance we find, that when something strikes us as beautiful, we pay attention to it, not just to gaze at it as it were, but to actually ask ourselves, why is this beautiful? What is the nature of this effect, this impression it is making on me? Why do I feel this? All of this, the idea of absolute truth, of absolute beauty, of absolute justice, these concepts go against the modern idea of subjectivity, of that you know, because I feel something, it is true. This is not the test, really. There's a different kind of experience that we need to develop of reality, not just experience in the 60s sense, or I had lots of experience as man, you know. It's to really deeply look at something and everything and find that resonance that is there. Why is it that this is affecting me in this way? Why is this important? Why is this real? What is the nature of this thing? And so that's the artist, really. The artist is that person who can do this, who can pursue this in himself, in herself. And the musician, I mean, I think that all kinds of music have this capacity. You know, people kind of draw lines between classical music and popular music and so on. I think all great music, I mean, to me there's, of course there are different kinds of music, and they kind of do different things. But there is great music and there's the rest. And there can be great music in any idiom. And it seems to me that, you know, whether the one is a great classical composer or, you know, a rock and roller, or a folk musician or even a country musician or whatever it is, that musician has the capacity to find that harmony in himself and herself and convey it. And that in our culture now, which denies all of these qualities that we so rely upon, depend upon for our coherence, for our dynamism as human beings, our cultures deny that these exist even. They treat the world as if it was a completely random, you know, a place where nothing happens for a reason, nothing has a meaning. And so to me, the artist is a subversive in that situation, is to convey this experiment, as it were, with reality that is conducted in his own heart and soul through the channels that are made available to the heart of the other person, of the person who hears, the person who sees, and who then in observing and understanding what is happening in the artist finds that mechanism within himself or herself also to create a similar, for him, experience, a subjective experience in that sense, but in this case one to be trusted because it has been verified against others. So I think there's a difference. You know, we have the age of relativism, the age of subjectivity. Can be kind of many pitfalls, but at the same time, as Cyril Sutu said, you know, subjectivity is important. You know, the fact that I am here at the center of things, my understanding, my looking out here of these eyes, hearing things through these ears, this is the only instrument I have to understand reality. Therefore, in a certain sense, I am the center of the universe. I need to understand that. There's something shocking about my presence here in this way. There's something shocking that I am in here now, looking out at the world for the first time in the whole of human history, that there is a subjectivity from in here. And each of us has this experience, but we don't trust it anymore because our culture tells us nothing, that it's nothing, that we shouldn't trust it because we are all just atomized individuals, equal, as it were. But we're not, because each of us has an equality or an identity that is subjective, that is unique, and we need to remember that it is not that we are being simply we're crawling around, as I say, the face of the planet like insects. There's something extraordinary about every instant of our existence here. So we need to explore that and to be aware of that. Our awareness all the time needs to be heightened to that level. And that's the purpose of all art, of all music, of all painting, of all theatre, is to alert us to this fact. Ideologies really just short-circuit experience. They lead us to think other people's thoughts. You know, I mean, it's important to understand what other people say, but really, as Cyril Sutu said, the work is not finished until the knowing person sees it and understands it. And that can actually be greater than that of the artist. The spectator, the viewer, the listener may actually understand the work far better than the artist. This is the paradox of art. Again, what we hear is given. What we see is given. If I can explain this in a way that, I mean, John Lennon used to talk about this, that the great songs come to you, they're written already. They're like the apple falling from the tree onto Newton's head, and he understands gravity. The song comes fully formed. I think this is an entirely different idea to what the modern, postmodern idea of art is, which is that it's a random juxtaposition of sound or shapes. And that's deadly, that idea, because that creates chaos in the mind of the hearer, of the listener, of the viewer, spectator. It creates a resonance that is frightening, that tells them there is nothing, there is no meaning, there is nothing. It's a terrifying idea, and it's very, very dangerous. I find this a lot with a lot of modern novels. You know, writers who have all the skills of great writers, maybe the capacity to be the greatest writers who ever were, because they can write incredible characters, write amazing dialogue, they can write extraordinary description, you know, atmosphere, all of these qualities that make for great writing. But when you read their books are meaningless because they have nowhere to go, because there is nowhere to go in their heads. We're all like on a train, culturally speaking, going in the same direction. And if you can't even get off the train, you can't turn around and start going backwards on the train. It doesn't matter, the train's moving, and all you're doing is really rebelling against. So in order to create something new, you have to get off the train and go 100 miles away and start again. And that's really hard to do, imaginatively, I mean to kind of annul the metaphor right there. It's very hard to imagine yourself in this culture, because it has all the appearances of naturalism. When a whole culture is consensual like this and it is trundling along the same direction at the same time, it seems to be the way things would have been, no matter what, willy-nilly. And but that's actually not true. It is possible to imagine something completely different. It is possible to start again, but you need to clear your head and get out of that and find yourself first, and clear away all the debris that has been generated in all kinds of layers by different eras of culture. And that's so hard for an artist to do, and you're probably you're going to have, I would say, maybe several generations getting it all wrong before we make that correction. But the correction has to happen because it is essential, because without it then we just go over the cliff. I think that's where the disunity ends, where the disunity of the individual, generating the disunity of the society, of the collective, that results the chaos that brings us over that cliff edge. And I'm sure when jazz was at its height, that seemed to be the end of everything. That seemed to be the last movement. What do you do beyond jazz? But then the next thing happened, rock and roll. Right now it's impossible to imagine how there could be anything post-rock and roll in terms of popular music. How could there be another form hidden away somewhere? What could it be? But there is. This is the thing, there is. I think it's very hard to kind of go beyond Bob Dylan. He to me is the total consummate artist of the modern era, because he is both modern in all those senses that perhaps are good and bad, but he is also traditional. He says really weird things like that. Weird, I mean, to our culture now, that all his songs are essentially biblical. That if it's not from the Bible, it's not true. He says stuff like that, and so he understands the lineage that he comes from, even if people don't necessarily always give him due respect for that. We need to understand lots of stuff that we don't understand because our culture is so loud now. It blocks us in every way. Like our culture is full of noise, and we don't really understand our condition. That the reason we're in this kind of atheistic phase is not a naturalistic stage of human evolution. It's actually because all the noise stops us from, and all the clutter stops us from seeing and hearing the truth about ourselves, which is that our lives are given to us no matter what, that we're, as Don Giussani said, I don't make myself. That's the most fundamental thing. I don't make myself. It's really hard to get beyond that, even if you're an artist, especially if you're an artist, because that tells you that something is not in this box. It's not in this reality that you've kind of co-opted as your total version of everything. And I think the artist has to go back out of that box. Most of the art of the last 50 years has happened in that box. Paul Benedict talked about the bunker that man built for himself to live in, to shut out the mystery. The greatest artists now, it seems to me, in potential, are actually atheists, quite extreme atheists. I'm talking about someone like Laszlo Krasznahorkai, the Hungarian novelist, who writes these totally kind of weird and, I would have to say, bleak novels. But the bleakness comes from his failure to break beyond. But if he ever did break beyond, he would be the most extraordinary genius of all time, I believe. And that's. But I couldn't tell him how to do it, and he probably hasn't a clue what I would be talking about. It's very hard to imagine, but that's what art is, to imagine that connection. If it was easy, everybody would be already doing it. It's impossible, and that's, to bring us back to the title, the impossible unity. It's impossible, but it is not impossible. It's a paradox, yeah, it's impossible right now. But this is the thing, when it happens, everybody will say, yeah, that was obvious. Like that kind of synthesis of, white music and black music, which just it came together in Elvis, like in this person. But that's what art is. It's not this kind of consensual repetition. forms, which we seem to have settled on as a definition of art, where people get prizes for ringing some minor change on an existing formula. My favourite line of Pope Benedict is the truth always has a future. The truth always has a future. Think about that. It means that the truth that's written in here can't be booked. I mean, you can book it all your life, but one day somebody will wake up and have to say, oh no, we gotta go back onto those tracks or we're lost. That's going to happen. I started off as a rock and roller, and I couldn't be further in lots of ways from that right now. In a certain sense, in a certain cultural sense, people think of me as a reactionary, I don't see myself as that way. In that way, I think it seems to me that rock and roll, the spirit of rock and roll, is the spirit of inquiry. It's the spirit of thirsting, of crying out for justice and truth and beauty and all those things. And if rock and roll has stopped doing that, then it's not really rock and roll anymore. So it's a dead form. This is one of the great paradoxes of the whole. We were talking about Gaudi with Zoroaster. John Dusani talked about this question of tradition and freedom. And it's a really hard thing, like you have to like Dylan, pay attention to what you inherit, but you also have to be free to create the new form. The trick is finding where do those two things join. How do you make them knit together? How do they match up? You can knit them together that way because that's what you feel. But then the mob will decide if you're right. That everybody else's heart will verify or not what you've done. That's art, really. I mean, at the end of the day, art moves, and the great artists move people all at once. My story is really that I was heading in one direction, and I was kind of a creature of the 60s, freedom-loving kind of, freedom of a certain kind, and I was heading off on this path, and I was my progress was arrested by my experience of alcohol, and I had a very strange experience there with a person that I'd known before, who was kind of, when we were both drinking, we were friends, and he brought him over to me, and my first instinct was to be embarrassed. He'd think I'm an alcoholic, but he was an alcoholic. And that reunion it was a very pivotal moment in my life, because I was able to, for the first time, through him, access my childhood understanding of God and rebuild it. To literally find that foundation stone and to build again that. That was the beginning of my journey back, as it were, from that tangential trip into the ether, or wherever I was going. I don't know. So that kind of thing happens, I suppose, pretty regularly. I mean, as you go older, you find that almost everything in your life is like a play. It's like a drama. There's nothing spare. Everything is like reference to something that happened before. All the characters are like people that were almost in before, or they've got some connection with stuff that was in before. So that reinforces the sense that it's a journey. It's not a random series of experiences. It's a journey, and it's converging. And I guess if you were to kind of pay real close attention, you probably could figure out how long more it's going to last. But that's not I don't like to do that.